In this video, I'm going to be talking about how we get all the content we've learned in the course and put it into some of our extended essay writing. I'm going to be focusing on the essays that you might write for OCR A-level geography specification, but the skills in this video can be used to apply to your essays in multiple different subjects. What I'm going to focus on first of all is the two elements we did in our essays. We need to be able to apply the content and understanding of the course, which is what we call the knowledge, the AO1. But we then need to make our arguments complex and have subtlety. And this is the AO2. This is the deeper understanding. This is where we apply the knowledge. So I'm going to be talking about those concepts throughout the essay. I'm going to do this by using a technique called pests. This helps me to do the AO1, so I will be able to apply the knowledge in the point and the explanation. This is going to have evidence and place-specific detail in there. And then I'm going to look at how I make the complexity of the argument. So this is the AO2, and I do this by looking at concepts like scale, time, success, and significance. I don't need to use all of those in an essay, but it's about how can I use these to make my argument a little bit more complex rather than just regurgitating a whole lot of information without actually making an argument. The way that I like to describe it to my students is that you are a lawyer. You have to come up with a case which you give evidence for, but then you have to have complexity in that argument to actually be able to win your case. You don't just recite several different facts in a row because it doesn't have any complexity and no deeper meaning. So I'm going to be talking about pests later on, and this is the technique that I'd like you to use to make your essays more complex. The essay I'm going to look at is one that you would get on the changing, spacing, making places bit of the course. And this essay is about structural economic change. And if I got a question like this, it's a 16 marker, so I'd be expected to write 2.5 pages of exam paper on this. What I would do first of all, if I was preparing for this, would break it down. So I need to make sure that I am talking about impacts in this essay, and particularly impacts of structural economic change. So I have to have knowledge of what that actually does. We're talking about how this affects both people and places. And the question is actually asking me, do I think that these impacts are largely environmental or not? The command word for this is discuss. So a bit like you might have done at GCSE, I need to say one side of the argument where I'd say that yes, it is environmental, and then another side of the argument to say, well, potentially it's not, and I'm making a judgment on that. It says I need to have a case study. So here, one country or region. In this example, I'm going to be talking about Birmingham. So I've broken down the question. I understand what I'm trying to answer, and then I'm going to start with an introduction. My key tips for an introduction would be that we would keep it very brief. I want to start with a definition of any of the key terms I think are really important. And I've done that here at the start of my argument by talking about what structural economic change is. It's only a sentence long, but I've got a really punchy definition there of what structural economic change actually is. I then need a brief one line to bridge into the argument. And here, again, I've said that impacts are complex from structural economic change. They can be environmental, but there are also ones we can consider in my argument. I don't want to necessarily explain everything I'm going to talk about in my argument because I'm going to do that in the main section of my argument. I think that this gets into the question quickly enough, but it also shows that I know what I'm talking about and shows the examiner that I understand some of the content that's going to go in there. That's how I'd start it. No more than 3 to 4 lines. The shorter, the better, but it has to be short and full of detail. A bit like a Michelin star restaurant. You often get very small portions, but the food is very, very well made. That's what a good introduction should be like. So in my main argument, I'm going to show you how I would have answered this question. I'm going to stop it halfway through the video so you can have a go at attempting the next bit. And then I'll show you how I would have answered the second and third paragraphs. In my argument, I want to make sure that I'm using the words as questions given to me. I need to make a clear but complex point And when I come on to the explanation, I want to make sure that the evidence, the place-specific detail, is woven in. And then I need to make sure that the examiner knows where I'm going with my argument, so I'm going to signpost with some good connecting words. Those are my 4 tips for clear point and argument, and I'll show you how I've done this. So I said I want to start with the words given to you in the question. So the question asked me about the impacts of structural economic change, and I've actually put all of these in my point. It said structural economic change. It said the impacts are largely environmental, so I've got the word environmental here, and I've got the word impacts. And I've said, to make it slightly more complex, I've said that it can bring some positive impacts to a place. What you'll see that there's only one line here on my point. I haven't written 2 or 3 lines. I want it to be punchy. I want it to start, and that's what I've done here. I'm going to do most of the explanation in my next couple of lines. So here, in my explanation, if I'm talking about structural economic change, I need to show the examiner which structural economic change I'm talking about. So I talk in my first line about Birmingham losing car manufacturing, and that the structural economic change was a switch to a service-based economy in the 90s. I haven't gone on to explain in loads of detail what I mean by that, but I've said to the examiner that's the structural economic change I am talking about. So I've signposted it right from the start where I'm talking about. So after that, what I start to do is I actually explain this point I've made, that it has made positive environmental impacts. I've said that lots of money has been invested by the local and national government, and that the key bit I'm talking about here is that I've said that there are former industrial sites that have been cleaned up as part of the regeneration. I've talked about that with examples, and I've underlined the examples I've used. National's power station being turned into Star City, the canal and waterways being cleaned up by the Canal and River Trust, and that being one of them being Brindley Places. I've then linked back to the question right at the end. I said that this has brought significant environmental improvements to the built environment in the city. So the examiner knows that I've talked about positive environmental impacts, I've given place-specific examples, and I've, just to make sure they hadn't fallen asleep, I've linked back to the question. That's taken me 3 to 5 lines, and at the moment I've got a decent argument. I'm agreeing with the main question. What I want to do now is the bit that a lot of students forget to do. I want to add some complexity. What I like to call this is the yeah, but. So I might have made a point and explained that point, but do I completely agree with it? And that's where sometimes I might use the yeah, but. But if I do really agree with it, that's where I need to maybe reinforce and say this is particularly significant because of that. In this example, I'm actually going to say, well, it's maybe a little bit more complex than I initially let on. So here, out of my SSTS, so this is the pests thing I'm using now, I want to talk about scale, spatial. As a geographer, I want to say that maybe these environmental changes happen, but not everywhere. So I'm talking about differences between places. What I've done in my argument, and I've highlighted the bits in red, I've said, yes, there has been positive changes, but it mainly has occurred in the CBD and a few other sites. That means the scale is very limited. So there are lots of places in Birmingham where it remains unchanged. Here again, I'm linking back to summarise all the point I've made above. I've said, yes, there are positive impacts, but those only happen in specific areas, and therefore not everybody and not all the people see the benefits. This last line in particular, where I highlight not everybody and all places, is again linking back to the word people and places in the question. So this would be my first opening argument that I would go for if I was writing this essay. I've got a clear point. I've written 3 or 4 lines on explaining that point, and then I've come back with the complexity in the argument, the application, the AO2. This again is AO2 being applied here. And here I've gone, yeah, but it's not as simple as that. Maybe those positive environmental impacts aren't everywhere. What I'd like you to do is I've given you a point to have a look at. I want you to stop the video and have a go at writing what you might write for this point. the point I'm trying to make is social economic impacts of structural economic change are significant as they occur at a city-wide level. Have a go at writing that in the format I've tried: a clear point, 3 or 4 lines on the explanation, and a couple of lines on the AO2 application of your argument. Either a yeah, but, or saying, well, this is significant because of that. So you've stopped the video, hopefully. I'm going to move on and show you what I wrote for this. Again, I've got a really clear one-line point. I've said that it does occur at a city-wide level. The city-wide level, again, is talking about spatial elements here. In my explanation, I've brought up the fact that I've made that reference again to the service economy, just to make sure the examiner hasn't fallen asleep. But I've got lots of place-specific detail, again, underlined. Flagship projects, given an example, renovation of the Bull Ring, have created lots of jobs. This has created a multiplier effect, and that has increased tourism in the city. I've shown how significant this is because I've given some figures to show what the unemployment rate was in the 80s and what it is today. And I've used this word widespread just to show to the examiner that I think that this is a big impact on a big scale. So rather than a yeah, but in my complexity here, I kind of double down on my argument just to make sure the examiner knows how important this is. I've said that this is a significant socio-economic impact because it's citywide, and then I've even expanded a bit to say because the city is going to grow with new investments like HS2, it looks like these citywide growth impacts, these positive impacts, are going to be long-term impacts. So here, not only have I talked about scale and spatial, but I've actually added another AO2 concept. I've talked about time, how in the future it's going to get even bigger and better. Here, my argument has become more complex than just saying, yes, this is significant. I've said why it's significant, as I've focused very much on that it's a city-wide. This is at a large scale. Lots of students in their essays just say it is significant and don't explain to the examiner very, very clearly why that is the case. I talked earlier on about signposting, just to make sure we know what that is. These are these kind of nice phrases that I can put in between the start of sentences just to make sure examiners know where I'm going. So therefore is a particularly good one to use. That shows the examiner that I'm kind of summarizing something. This is also... There's another good one here. I might use one of my favorites is as this means that, or as a result. They're all really good lines that just show the examiner that we're going this way, we're logically thinking, rather than disparate sentences that don't really match up. So the last argument I would make, I would talk about demographic impacts. Again, there's a one-line clear point here, which says that it does that they can occur, but they're often small scale. I've then given some examples: 50,000 students, and I've talked about the universities they attend here, place-specific detail, and then I've said that they have brought in social economic benefits as well, which again says that's applying the knowledge, saying that sometimes some factors can actually affect and link to other factors. But again, my AO2, the complexity here, as I said, it's only a small percentage of Birmingham's population, so the scale of the impact is too small to make a significant change. Again, I've stuck with my argument saying what I really wanted to discuss here is the scale of these changes and impacts. And I've said environmental was very localised, social economic was citywide, but demographic is again localised. I think 3 arguments is what I would be aiming for if I wanted to get an A star. I feel like I can write that in the amount of time I have, which is about 22 to 24 minutes for this essay. And I would have a conclusion just to, again, signpost to the examiner I know what I'm talking about and that my argument is clear. Here, I don't want to add new information. I'm essentially summarising your main argument and its complexity. So I'm briefly stating my points again. I've in my conclusion that I've written here, I've said it's a complex issue. It can have a variety of impacts. I've said that environmental and demographic impacts can occur, but they're often much smaller scale. And then I've said what I actually believe is that structural economic change can create environmental impacts, but the main changes are largely socioeconomic, as this impacts people at a much larger scale. I think that this is a good essay that would show lots of complexity, a deep level of understanding of the content, but it's not just a case study dump. I'm not just using the case study information to show off that I've revised the case study. I've got a great argument like a good lawyer, and I'm able to show that it's a complex argument where I've considered several factors and then made my conclusion. This in total would be about in the range of 650 words, which would be enough to get full marks for a 16 marker.